Hey everyone, DM Xavier here. We've had a great initial turnout of support for my videos, so I wanted to say thank you again to my Twitch community and to all of those of you who have taken the time to watch. If you're enjoying the content so far, please click the like button below, subscribe, share, and don't forget to slam that bell icon to ensure that you get notifications as soon as I upload new content. Without further ado, let's begin. Episode 2, A Holy Helping Hand. Bryseis spent another night at the Laughing King Inn, not to perform, but to relax and inwardly reflect on all that had just happened. She held the unholy symbol of Vecna in her hand while she lay on the simple wooden bed. Why you? She thought to herself, unable to rationalize why simple bumpkin thieves would have this in their possession. Shortly after, she faded off to sleep. She awoke in the morning, cleaned herself up, and gathered her belongings before heading to the Temple of Moradin in the city's northeastern quarters. As she entered the gates to the massive white marble temple, adorned with pillars topped with silver hammers, she was approached by a middle-aged dwarven man who stood roughly 4.5 feet tall, with well-kept dark red hair, a beard tied off in the front with a holy symbol of Moradin, and a full suit of nearly unscathed scale mail. At his side hung a simple battle axe emblazoned with the symbol of the Dwarf Father. "I would assume you're Bryseis. Iron Fist told me that I may be expecting you today. Said something about Dirk finding near the city, eh?" Bryseis looked the man over before nodding. He smiled through his bushy whiskers and turned to walk into the temple. "Follow me, dear. I have some information for ye." Bryseis followed the dwarf into the temple. The interior was simple. Wooden pews, wooden offering boxes, and the scent of burning sage and lavender. Small oil lamps hung from the walls, giving a slightly eerie glow to the pale interior. The priest approached a large marble altar at the head of the pews and turned again to Bryseis. "My name is High Priest Sterric Cragmound. I'm in charge of the Temple of Moradin here in Helm'Kar. My cousin runs the Children of Moradin in Grell, so I've known of your existence for quite some time now." Bryseis smiled and shook her head. "I suppose word gets around when a girl with demon blood shows up in the night on the doorstep of a dwarven priest." They both smiled and chuckled quietly. "Now, dear, let me have a look at this symbol you've stumbled upon." Bryseis removed the object from her satchel and laid it on the altar, taking time to slowly remove the cloth that covered it. Cragmound looked down at the symbol as it vibrated ever so slightly on the altar, clearly in the presence of an opposing deity. "One moment, dear. I'm going to have a quick peek into where this thing's been over the last week or so." With that, he laid out a small bowl and placed a handful of incense into it, along with 2 platinum coins. He closed his eyes and began to mutter a prayer while tracing a series of dwarven runes around the unholy symbol of Vecna, each rune flashing with blue light before growing dim and letting off a light white smoke. As the spell concluded, the bowl ignited with divine fire for just a moment before snuffing out, consuming all of the offerings in the process. Cragmound opened his eyes, which now sat pupilless in his skull and glowing with a soft white light. His eyebrows moved rapidly as if he were glancing around the room at something that was clearly not there. He then spoke a single sentence that was not of this world. As the final word exited his mouth, his eyes flashed blood red before returning to normal. He breathed deep and exhaled, sweating from the experience. Bryseis looked at the priest in shock. What the hell was that?" He looked up at her through sweat-soaked hair. "By all that's holy, it would appear that the cultists were acting on behalf of Vecna, a god of secrets, evil secrets, and they've taken up residence in our beloved homeland. It all makes sense now. Last week, the King's Guard caught a man coming up from the sewers. When he was taken into custody, he bit down on a suicide ampule. They found a symbol on him. Bryseis' eyes widened. So, this is bigger than just a couple of thugs stealing alcohol. I fear it is. And I'd hate to ask this of you. But in order to keep this quiet, so as to not spread panic among the locals, would you be willing to have a look into this for me? I have sewer access, and I have someone I'd introduce you to, who would join you, of course. Bryseis nodded. Of course. Please tell me this person is a priest. Cragmount smiled. Yes. Brother Heskan, he called towards a side door. Can you join me in the prayer hall? The large wooden door, with a rounded top and silver handles, opened surprisingly quietly for its size, and through it walked a very young, 25 at best, 6-foot-tall, copper-scaled dragonborn man with crisp blue eyes and a slender frame. He bore the symbol of the mighty platinum dragon Bahamut on a large steel shield affixed to his back, a simple flanged mace, and a suit of chainmail with a white tabard over the top also bearing the symbol of the dragon god. High Priest Cragmount, did she agree? He said, glancing out of the corner of his eye at the tiefling woman. Aye, my boy. This is Bryseis of the Children of Moradin and Grell, he said as he gestured towards Bryseis. Bryseis smiled and childishly put up a hand in greeting before looking down and away. Bryseis, it is my pleasure. My name is Heskan, Cleric of Bahamut, on leave from the temple in Blackburg. If you're prepared, should we make for the sewer? Better to be down there during the day. Bryseis looked up again. Yes, I think that's a wise choice. Let's be off then. Cragmount led the two out of the temple and around the back, where he unlocked a small gate that opened into a small alcove which contained a single iron sewer grate in the center. He motioned for the grate and told the two that this was his access point. He also informed them that the man who was caught by the Kingsguard exited at one of the western points in the city. With that, the two descended the iron ladder that took them 15 feet down into the sewer. As they reached the bottom, the scent of raw sewage and rot swept over them. The sound of dripping to the west and the occasional squeak could be heard echoing through the tunnel that stood a solid 6.5 feet high, much larger than expected for a dwarven city. As Bryseis' vision adjusted to the darkness, taking up shades of gray, Heskan muttered a prayer to Bahamut and touched his mace, which flashed with divine light, before becoming a beacon for him to see with. Bryseis winced at the light before her own eyes adjusted. Sorry, Heskan said. One gift my people never received from Bahamut was the ability to see when it gets dark. He chuckled. I'll lead the way. Keep your eyes out. Bryseis fell into line behind Heskan and drew her short bow, mindlessly humming while they walked. 15 minutes went by before the tunnel turned into a 4-way intersection. Taking the orders from Cragmount, the two decided to continue west. Another 15 minutes of walking went by before Heskan held up a hand. The tunnel opened into a small, 20 by 30 foot wide platform with a single exit grate along the bottom row of stones centered on the wall. Do you hear that? He said as he looked down at the grate. Before Bryseis could get a word out, they came. Thousands of tiny rats poured out of the grate and swarmed around the priest. Heskan fought to brush them off, swinging and smashing what he could with his mace. Bryseis panicked, seeing Heskan drowning in the swarms. She belted out a soft tune which took to his ears and inspired him to continue to fight, but before he could fully react, the rats had chewed through his boots and chainmail, making fist-size holes in his scales as they entered his body cavity. He screamed out and collapsed. He hit the ground hard as the light from his mace went out. The rats then turned their attention to Bryseis, who'd drawn her short sword and began slashing. She breathed deeply as they began to bite and dig into her flesh. As she did, her chest grew unnaturally extended. She then flashed a series of arcane gestures and belted out a yodel that turned into a wave of thunderous energy, blowing hundreds of the rats from in front of her into the wall that they had come from, turning most into nothing more than red splotches of gore. Unfortunately, they continued their assault, and before she could react, they were upon her again, digging, clawing, and biting until the blood loss was too great. Bryseis' vision faded as she fell. In the darkness, as her spirit began to ascend from her body, she heard a voice.
Bryseis, it's not time. Not yet.
one that called out to her from beyond the ether. The familiar voice of the cleric she'd just met called out to her as she rapidly descended back into her physical form. She breathed out quickly, her eyes jolted open. Heskin kneeled over her, praying furiously with hands outstretched. Golden divine energy poured from his fingertips like a holy waterfall, stitching up the wounds she'd just suffered. The spell concluded, and he whispered another soft prayer as the mace lit back up with its familiar golden light. "Are you okay? I almost lost you," he said, looking down at her and directly into her eyes. His face contorted into a look of genuine panic. I'm alright, I think. I was floating, and then I heard you, and now I'm here." She looked around in a daze. "Are the rats gone?" she asked. "Yes. Thank Bahamut. When we fell, they seemed to have lost interest and scattered." Heskin helped Bryseis to her feet, and the two began to look around the alcove while brushing themselves off. After a couple of minutes, Bryseis pointed out a strange cut that had been made into one of the walls. "I know dwarven craftsmanship," she said. "This is clearly a door that was built in and not meant to be seen. And look! I'll be damned! It's a symbol of the rusty nails," she said as she pointed to a tiny etched symbol along the stone that appeared to be a single nail bent almost completely in half. "I found the same symbol on the thugs who were in possession of the unholy symbol of Vecna. Heskin, if they're in here, we need to find out and report it to Cragmount." "I couldn't agree more," he replied. "Though, let's take a minute to get ourselves patched up, because if they're inside, I don't think they'll go down without a fight." With that, he procured a healer's kit and bandaged up the remainder of the wounds they'd suffered while fighting the rat swarms. Once they were back on their feet, Heskin once again took the lead and slowly pushed the secret door open. As he did, he saw a long hallway, cut directly into the stone underbelly of the city and not from the same sewer line they'd been traveling in. The pair began to quietly creep down the hall. When they reached the end, a single door stood before them, hewn from wood with an iron handle. Heskin tested the door. "Unlocked," he whispered to Bryseis. "Wait." Bryseis pushed past him and put an ear to the door. She listened intently and heard two voices on the other side speaking in hushed Dwarven, a language that thankfully she knew.
"I'm telling you, I heard the rats. They only come out if something living passes that door. Either the guards are down in the tunnels looking for us still, or another animal got loose down here. Well, it's quiet now, Gronar. Clearly the rats took care of whoever it was." "Yeah, but how do you explain the thunder?" "Maybe it's storming up top. Come on, man, settle yourself down in the name of all that's unholy."
Bryseis pulled her ear from the door and told Heskin that they were assumed dead. Heskin nodded and then took up a position at the door again. "I'm not going to give them a chance to speak, but if we can take one alive..." Bryseis nodded immediately. With that, Heskin placed one hand on the door and began muttering a divine incantation. He depressed the handle on the door with his left hand and traced a sigil in the air with his right. As the spell came to a head, he threw the door open and extended his arm out, palm open, where a beam of golden energy erupted out and across the room, striking one of the two very tattered and beaten-up looking dwarves at a small wooden table. The beam struck true and knocked the man out of the chair and onto the floor, where his entire body began to pulsate with a similar golden energy. Bryseis loosed an arrow from her short bow over Heskin's shoulder and struck the man on the ground with ease. The arrow buried itself deep in the man's chest, and with a muffled groan, he breathed his last breath and ceased to exist. The second dwarf, eyes wide, drew a crude throwing axe and hurled it full force across the room at Heskin. The axe hit Heskin in the left shoulder and bit deep, drawing blood but bouncing off of his chainmail. Heskin winced in pain and entered the room, where a third man, unseen initially, slashed at him with a dagger, catching him off guard and cutting a deep wound in his right thigh. He winced again and yelped at the sudden pain, but continued to move. This time, he raised up his mace and swung with precision, catching the melee assailant across the top of the head, shattering his skull in the process. The man dropped his dagger and fell backwards, bashing his head off of a crate behind him before falling still on the ground. Bryseis entered behind Heskin and called out to the final dwarf, "Don't move or you die. We have questions." The dwarf looked up through soiled locks of black hair and opened his mouth, showcasing all but 2 teeth inside and a graveyard of black nubs.
In the name of the Lord of Secrets, I condemn you both to death,
he said as if though he were an executioner for some unknown dark lord. With that, he began to go for another throwing axe at his side before Bryseis loosed a second arrow, landing the shot in the man's throwing hand. The dwarf screamed out in pain and drew a short sword with his good hand. He rushed forward and slashed wildly at Bryseis, landing a single grazing blow across her abdomen. Heskin turned on his heels and whispered a single word of holy power. Golden motes of energy radiated around the fresh wound, which sealed completely. With that, he raised his mace again and swung down at the dwarf. Seeing the incoming attack, the dwarf raised his short sword and deflected the weight of the mace. Noticing an opportunity, Bryseis drew her own short sword and thrust it up quickly into the man's chest. He gasped once, dropped his own weapon, and looked down at the blade in him.
There is no death with Vecna.
He breathed out as he slipped into unconsciousness. Heskin swung down hard on the man's skull as he slid off of Bryseis' blade, finishing the work that she had just started. There is no life with Vecna, he said as he stood tall over the man's corpse. Heskin prayed again, and golden streams of healing energy flowed from his hands across his own body, sealing the wounds he'd just suffered from the thugs. Bryseis began searching the room while Heskin cured himself. She found a few more of the unholy symbols of Vecna, which she wrapped and stored in her pouch, a tiny chest of coins, and a single folded piece of parchment with a broken wax sigil bearing the seal of Vecna. Bryseis opened the letter and began reading. It stated that this branch of the Rusty Nails, those who operated in and around Helm'Kar, were tasked with the preparations for the coming of the supreme evil. It then detailed the sewer system below Helm'Kar and specific points at which they'd release swarms of rats to ward off any intruders. Bryseis folded the note and stowed it away. Heskin, I think we have what we came for. This note is very incriminating, so I'd say it's best that we get back to the surface. Heskin looked in her direction. Sounds good to me. Better to not linger. The pair then took to the sewer once more, making extra effort to quietly slip past the grate the rats had come from, and made their way to the entrance to the east. Once there, they ascended and made for the temple. They entered to High Cleric Cragmound, performing a cleansing ritual around the interior. He stopped after noticing them and motioned for the two to enter the rear room that Heskin had come from earlier. They did so, and after a short wait, he entered, smelling of burnt sage and lavender. The two explained everything that had just unfolded in the sewers to the high priest and presented him with the letter and the unholy symbols. He took them and told them that he would dispose of the unholy symbols himself, and after reading the letter, promised that he would speak with his superiors and other local officials for guidance. He thanked the two and offered each of them a few healing potions and a small share of coins for their work. Bryseis and Heskin left the temple for the time being, and made their way to the Laughing King Inn, where they sat and talked for the afternoon, sharing stories of their pasts and speculating on the future. Heskin, Bryseis said after a while, thank you for bringing me back from death's door. I've never experienced that before, and it was much less frightening hearing your voice calling me back. Heskin smiled awkwardly. You're welcome. It's what I do. It's what I've always done. And, thank you, too, for, inspiring me to keep fighting after I had already given up hope. You're welcome, too, she said back with a sly smile on her face. So, are you going to stay at the temple until we hear back? She asked. Yes, I'm stationed here for the time being, so I'll have to get back to my duties. Bryseis smiled again. I understand. I'll stay here. And look, if you're interested, I'll be performing at night for some extra coin. You should come have a listen. The dwarves seem to love it. Okay, I might stop by and watch, he replied. Heskin then bid her farewell and went back to his duties at the temple. 2 days went by before he came to watch, but eventually he did, sitting in the furthest corner of the inn, hood up, quietly drinking his tea while he watched Bryseis spin around the room, yodeling tales of old in the dwarven tongue to a packed house of very intoxicated and jovial dwarves. Another full day passed before any news came back from High Priest Cragmound. When it did, Bryseis was summoned to the meeting chambers along with Heskin, where they were told that a couple of other incidents had popped up elsewhere on Trubenshard. Minor in nature, but potentially connected. It was with that Cragmound informed the pair that he had arranged a meeting for them with another group of individuals at the Wretched Gremlin Inn, northwest of Middleton. It was there that the group was to meet with the huntsman, who would fill them in on their next task at hand and introduce them to the remainder of their group. Cragmound bid them both a farewell as they left the temple. Bryseis stopped quickly at the Brewers Guild, where she obtained a tiny, portable cask of Iron Fist's famous Firebelly to use as sampling material for potential future sales. After that, the two left the capital of Helm'Kar and traveled south along the main road before veering off just after the mountain ranges ended and making their way to the Wretched Gremlin Inn. I'd like to give a huge thank you to all my viewers and subscribers. I've had some awesome feedback from episode 1, and I really hope to hear more about episode 2. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, share this video and others to help spread the word, and of course comment below with your favorite moment. Stay tuned for episode 3, A Gathering of Heroes, as it will premiere later this week. Until next time, my friends, be well and roll 20s.